Thanks so much for being here. Okay, who here loves riparian areas? Okay, we got lots of fans. And when I was putting together this presentation, I was reminded a lot of the things that riparian areas offer us that we sometimes, may forget. So I hope that this presentation inspires you, and there's sort of a teaser at the end with some proposed legislation to protect riparian corridors. So stay tuned for that. So today we're going to be talking about the benefits of riparian areas, threats from urbanization. We're going to look at a case study, the Ogden River restoration, and we'll also take a quick look at the Big Bend restoration along the Jordan River. We'll talk about resilient urban streams, what we can do to make streams resilient, and then we'll talk about the draft legislation. Okay, so riparian areas are where the magic happens. They are the transition zones between water and the upland areas. They provide habitat for organisms to grow, hide, feed, and reproduce. So they're super important for life at all levels, from vegetation and insects all the way up to mammals. So there are three main components to a riparian area. There's water, which supports natural flows and helps with the surface to ground water movement connecting between the two. There's vegetation. Riparian plants maintain soil structure and support habitat diversity, and they provide habitat for up to 1/3 of the plant species in the U.S. So that's a really important place for them. Another thing to think about is that these plants are they're well suited for wet areas. So they're wetland plants. There are herbaceous plants, and then there's trees like you see cottonwoods. You see a cottonwood, you know that you're in a riparian area because they are well suited for a riverine environment. And also aquatic and terrestrial life. So it provides food and shelter for many species, with 60% of the vertebrate species in the U.S. relying on these areas for habitat. Again, that's a really big deal. The pictures you've seen so far are mostly headwater streams. I was trying to find pretty pictures of urban riparian streams and wasn't quite as successful. But hopefully with the work that we'll be doing with the proposed legislation and just, all of us working together, we'll be able to have urban streams that look like this at some point. Okay, so this is a cool graphic about the benefits of riparian buffers. So we'll start out from the outside and kind of move in. So on the outer edges, before you get to the stream, you can see that there's agricultural land and then there's development. So on the right-hand side, there will be the pollutants that will be coming off of pastures and crops. And then on the left-hand side, there's lots of impervious surfaces that will speed up runoff. And from both sides, you're going to be getting pollutants. So why is a riparian area really important for this kind of movement of water from the uplands down to them? Well, they filter pollutants. They filter stormwater pollutants. They filter agricultural pollutants. And they keep them from getting into the stream. And what's super cool is that a lot of times they infiltrate into the soil and then are uptake by the vegetation, so that they're kept from moving into the areas and harming the pristine water quality resources of the stream. So they improve water quality. They also provide space for humans to enjoy. They provide wildlife habitat. And if you're looking down a little bit closer underneath, you'll see that there are areas for fish to live, fish habitat, and there are bacteria and fungi that use the organic litter that falls into the stream, and they decompose it, and it ends up being food for lots of different species that use the river for home. Okay, here's a couple of diagrams of riparian floodplains. And what's really cool about them is that they're alive. Like a riparian floodplain, it's moving sediment, it's moving water, it's there's particulate organic matter that's coming in from the vegetation, and then there's the fluxes. So the water is moving in a healthy riparian area. It's not stuck in a channel. It's adapting to precipitation events. It's adapting to runoff and snowmelt. If you look at the bottom right one where it says fluxes within the floodplain, it helps with hyparia exchange, which is the exchange that happens between surface and groundwater. So as the water table drops, the groundwater comes in and then can fill in the riparian area. And then the same thing with when the water's high, it filters back into the groundwater. So it's an amazing synthesis of the water moving back and forth. And you'll see a beaver dam there. Beaver dams are one of my favorite parts of riparian areas that back up the water and provide, actually, they provide corridors, underground corridors with the water, with canals that go underneath and in the edges of the riparian areas. So I've got my list here of all the things that riparian areas do. They provide good water quality. They also provide water storage, which is really important, particularly in the desert, so that there's a steady flow in the stream, as opposed to we get the runoff, it runs all the way down, it doesn't stay in the stream. And then when you get to the summer, when temperatures are hot and not a lot of precipitation, the water levels go much lower, and there's not much movement through the stream, and some of them even dry up. There's the riparian upland connectivity, and that's really important with wildlife. We'll talk about that a little bit in the next slide. Sediment transport, which is really important. I mean, we talk about we don't want sedimentation, but that's coming from erosion, and that's from an unhealthy riparian environment. For sediment transport is really important for a living stream. You want to have sediment moving, but you want to have it moving in the right way. Stream bank stability, that comes from the vegetation that you have on either side of the stream, and then wildfire buffers. People are finding that often when there's a wildfire, the riparian area is what stops the wildfire from going across and burning a larger area. Of course, if the wildfire is too big, it just jumps the creek, and if it's not healthy, but yeah, it does have a really important effect that way. Okay, so talk a little bit about habitat. Picture on the left is a deer chomping on cottonwood tree, which again is a riparian vegetation that's really common, particularly in the desert Southwest. It provides critical habitat for amphibians, insects, mammals, all kinds of different invertebrates, so reptiles. So it's food, water, shelter, and ecological transition zones that support habitat diversity. And diversity is a really big issue with riparian zones, because if you want to have kind of diversity, you need lots of different kinds of vegetation, you need access to water, and you need migration corridors, which you'll see is the last one. Stream shading. Riparian vegetation cools water temperatures and protects cold water habitat for a lot of aquatic species. You'll notice that there was a discussion earlier about fish blowouts. Having that kind of cool water is what supports a lot of the cold water species that we have here in Utah. And wildlife corridors. So riparian areas provide connectivity that supports species life cycles. I mean, if you think of trout and salmon, they're spawning, they lay eggs in one part of a river, and then they come and live in the other part, and we need to have that connectivity. A fish passage is really important so that their life cycles can play out. And then migration routes for all kinds of mammals, and then the ability to relocate. So if there's a problem in an area, the animals can use the riparian area to move to a new area and establish themselves there. So blue-green infrastructure, this is a relatively new idea. We've talked about green infrastructure a lot, but blue-green infrastructure takes into account the water aspect of it. So you can see how the vegetation and the water work together. So it's not just the keeping the pollutants out of the storm water through green infrastructure, it's the riparian areas that are providing a natural buffer to the water or water bodies. So thinking in terms of resilience, sustainability, reducing urban flood risk, temperatures overall in the urban environment, and then mediating for climate change and disaster risk reduction. Riparian areas they're such an important part of our urban ecosystem, and sometimes we neglect them. The picture on the left is from the Ogden River Restoration Project that I'll talk about a little bit later as a case study. And when you see the before pictures, you would never imagine that a fishery could have opened up there and that the kids would be playing in it because it was clean water. Okay, threats from urbanization. Picture on the left shows a healthy riparian stream ecosystem. You can see lots of different types of vegetation. There are birds, and you can see some fish in there, probably not the insects that live there, but there's wetland areas, there's stream sinuosity, all of these things which make for a healthy riparian area. And then you look at what happens often with urban development, but does not have to happen with urban development. So we can start thinking a little bit more outside of the box. All right, so you look at the urban development. There's not much connectivity between the river and the floodplain. It's become sort of a dumping ground for trash. The left-hand side of the picture, you can see that the stream bank has been hardened with riprap, which if there's any flooding that goes on and the water velocity is fast, the water hits the riprap and then bounces off to the other side. So that may be one of the reasons that the left-hand side of the picture has some vegetation, whereas the right-hand side has deeply incised stream banks and erosion. And there's the lack of connectivity and the lack of vegetation. So there's artificial vegetation on the left-hand side, not necessarily native species. The right-hand side is mostly grasses and weeds. And often these urban corridors become a way for invasive species to move up a river because they've got a perfect place to do it, and they're able to settle in where native species aren't as resilient for these particular types of conditions. Pollutants obviously are coming into the water. There's a pipe, I don't know if that's a stormwater pipe, but being directly put into the river. So it's not a healthy situation and not one that's really self-sustainable. Okay, some of the things that you'll find in urban riparian areas are channel confinement, and when you take a stream and you armor the bank and put it into a narrow corridor, it's very difficult for the stream to move, and there's not a lot of ability for it to do the things that a healthy stream is going to do, like when we were looking at the floodplain pictures. You could see that there was movement back and forth. Here there's no movement, it's just straight on down. So the stream velocities tend to go pretty quickly. They don't have the slowing mechanisms that a healthy riparian area does. So the erosion continues because of the fast streams. And then the vegetation also can't survive when the banks become so eroded that the tree roots can't even make it into the water table. Flooding, that's a big issue. We thought about it a lot this last spring when we had a record precipitation year. So infrastructure is really subject to flooding, particularly with the climate change that we're seeing. And areas that don't have healthy riparian zones that can absorb floodwaters and store that water are more prone to the kinds of flooding events that you see here and that some of us saw, particularly along the Ogden River, I noticed this last spring. Okay, stormwater runoff. Not everybody knows that stormwater isn't treated. I'm sure all of you do, but and the idea that this water is running off with pollutants, chemicals, E. coli, pathogens, oil, grease, all of that, and going straight into our rivers and streams without any buffering, it's really concerning. And there aren't a lot of ways that you can filter it unless you've got a healthy riparian area that you can use to naturally filter these pollutants out. All right, so I'm going to talk about a river restoration that is rather miraculous along the Ogden River. So this is the before picture. This is about 2010 when Ogden City requested hardship funding actually from DWQ and solicited funding from a number of other sources. But you can see there's tires, trash, the trees, particularly in the upper part of the picture, they're very far away from the water source, so the water table has dropped considerably, and there's lots of erosion. Here again, here's another picture, a lot of bank hardening. You can see all of the concrete that's been placed in there, which doesn't allow the stream to do what it's going to do. And if you look in the upper right, you can see how deep the banks have been incised just from the erosion. So first part was cleaning up the river. There were 5,684 tons of recyclable material removed, over 2,700 tires, many on rims, and there were plenty of cars too, 9 cars, with car parts including batteries, which not a good thing to have in a river. Almost 8,400 tons of debris and litter were taken out. This was non-recyclable, which filled 300 semis of garbage. And then they retrieved 22 boxes of cultural resource artifacts, which are now at the Utah Natural History Museum. So today, you can see, look at the stream banks. They've been contoured so that there's more connectivity between the vegetation and the river. And if you look like over to the left and to the right, you can see there's some diversity in the way the water is moving. Areas where there's water can move freely, other places where water is more confined, pools for fish. The restoration effort built these access points so anglers can get to the river, and then other people who want to get to the river. You can see some trees off to the right that were planted, and in a later picture you'll see how much they've grown. Boardwalks over wetland areas, and the wetland areas are stormwater return flows. So here we are, the wetlands are purifying and cleaning the stormwater that before was going just straight into the river, ensuring that the river stays clean. And I don't think anybody would have wanted to swim in the Ogden River from that first picture, but look at it now. It's a recreation amenity for the city. And it's a place where people can gather. It creates more community, and it offers opportunities for people to recreate in an urban environment, which is really important. And here again is another photo, and you can see the trees have grown up more, and what a beautiful place it's turned into. And Ogden City should take a lot of credit and pride for having completed this project. And they got the benefit of flood control. So this is the 2011 flood, and you can see the roadway is protected. There are no buildings that are being impacted, and the floodwaters are able to spread out in a way that is natural. Again, here you see the floodwaters are spreading out, and the structures on the left and the right side are not being impacted at all, because there's been the creation of the kind of environment where water can do what water wants to do. Okay, so 1.1 mile of river was restored. 30,000 plants, including trees and shrubs, were planted in the riparian area. 15 angler access paths were developed, and that's, people can use those if they're not fishing as well. There were 2 access paths put in for physically challenged visitors. 8 buildings in the riparian corridor were demolished. 17 acres of interior floodplain reconnected. So that's along that 1 mile of river. Approximately 2,600 linear feet of in-channel enhancements were added. 13 cross veins and in-channel habitat boulder clusters installed. We saw an example of the stormwater return areas, which included wetland environments, which are really important. 2 drainage swales that buffered adjacent development, and an Adopt a River program was established so that the people in Ogden could be part of sustaining the river and the restoration that had taken place for years to come. All right, what we want is resilient urban streams. That's what we're working on now. This is a picture of the Big Bend area along the Jordan River. You look on the right-hand side, you can see 10, 12-foot incised banks, the huge erosion that's occurred, invasive species on the left, and this is another wonderful success story. Now, if anybody wants to get super inspired, and some of the people who were, some of the people in the audience were on this, in this YouTube video, this is the light at the end of the river, and it's was just put up like a month or two ago about restoring the big bend of Utah's Jordan River. So I would play you the video if we had more time, but there's the URL if you'd like to check it out, if you want to be super inspired. But I'll give you just kind of a thumbnail sketch of what happened. So this portion of the Jordan River was along an area of Salt Lake that had smelters, Sharon Steel being the biggest one. And it was a Superfund site when the smelters shut down. And there was some restoration done, but the river was kind of what it was. So City of West Jordan and a bunch of other partners decided to get together and say, let's make this into an urban riparian area. And they've done an amazing job. There's 70, let me make sure I get all of the high points here. It's a 70-acre site. There was a connection of the Jordan River Parkway, so that the parkway now goes through this portion of the Jordan River. They're putting together a nature preserve and a recreation area. Sharon Steel had dredged, aligned and hardened the Jordan River at this point, and now their meanders are being reinstituted. There's been contouring of the slopes so that there's vegetation that's been planted. So instead of those big incised channels, we now have a contour with vegetation on the sides, and the river is starting to do what the river's starting to do, or should be doing. It's halted erosion. The natural floodplain is coming back. And in 2022, when we had the flooding, it handled it, because it was a river that was healthy, and it had the capability of absorbing the water as it came through. Now it's a place with wetlands, migratory birds, there's lots of wildlife that's coming back to the area, and it's an amenity for the community. And in the video, what the West Jordan mayor said was, "I'm excited to see life brought back to the river." And that's what we're talking about here in the urban environment, bringing life back to the river and letting the river bring life to us. There's a lot more work that's being done now on a recognition, I guess, that the stream ecosystems in urban areas are really critical and important. This was a study that was done by USGS in 2002, and we were one of the 9 metropolitan study areas, which is pretty exciting. And there's a lot of discussion about how stream restoration is worth it. I mean, it's quite expensive, but the benefits to the cities, the communities, over the long term it's invaluable. And when you look at all the things that riparian areas do, from filtering out pollutants to creating areas for people to recreate and getting people into to nature where they might not otherwise be able to, the flood control aspects of it. I mean, there's a lot of benefits from riparian areas that I think we don't always consider, but people are now. And the paper on the right, I'm hoping to do more of a deep dive into this, managing infrastructure in the stream environment. So many urban areas have built up, like they're on the floodplains, the riparian areas have been channeled, there's not a lot that people think they can do, but now we're looking at how can you work with the infrastructure that's already there, protect it through riparian restoration, and work with rivers and see the ways that a riparian area can benefit everybody in the urban environment. Okay, so if people want to pull out their phones and get a QR code, we've got riparian corridor amendments that are coming up in the 2024 legislative session. And the link that you're going to is what's posted currently. There have been a few changes, edits, but the main part of the legislation is available here. So you can look at the sort of the highlights of it, that it requires a riparian area element as part of a municipal or county general plan. And it provides for how a riparian element is included into a municipal or county general plan. and provides for action related to the general plan by the legislative body of a, okay, so basically what it is it's getting cities and towns to start thinking about riparian areas. Why are they important, right? What does it, how does it matter to us? And then it tells how a municipal or county general plan can include a riparian element. So it's not just saying, okay, go forth and just do this. It gives direction. And there's also going to be support for this plan. Provides for action for the general plan. So how a municipality or county can put this into action as part of their planning and implementation of plans. Okay, so the riparian area elements are preserving and enhancing natural stream functions, managing bank stability, erosion, sedimentation, and flood control, minimizing flood and fire risk to property through buffer zones. Did you see how all of this is taking into what we've been talking about earlier in this presentation? The whole idea of what a riparian area does and how can we, in an urban environment, capture those benefits and support the restoration of these areas. Reducing water pollution and protecting fish and wildlife habitat, preserving or restoring vegetation while managing invasive species, and preserving aesthetic and recreational values. These elements this is what makes a riparian element, a riparian area, a thriving part of your urban environment. So here's some of the strategies. Innovative zoning and preservation tools to regulate development, consideration of ecological function and the integrity of riparian features, protection of native riparian plants, protection of culturally significant landforms, best practices for herbicide, pesticide, and fertilizer use, all of which are super important, specific permits and exceptions for flexibility, because people who are along riparian areas, they may need to do things, and the plan needs to be able to find a way to accommodate both the river and the people who live next to it. Provide resource inventories to support planning efforts, identifying when and how heavy equipment would be necessary, maintenance and installation of flood control devices, coordination and cooperation with other entities. And this is really key to make these kinds of restoration programs or projects happen. It takes a village. It takes everybody working together. So a lot of times the community comes up and says, we'd love to do this. And then there are nonprofits, and there are state agencies, and there are local groups that are interested in working on this. And it's people on the ground that make these riparian restoration projects happen. They're the volunteers who go in and plant the native vegetation, who lead school groups to see the changes that have happened in the river, and be able to get up close to see, frogs and butterflies and native plants, and see what a riparian area can be and what nature can be in our urban environment. And then finally, riparian area management tools. So this is not without support. The Department of Natural Resources is devoting a full-time employee for technical assistance to cities and counties, and the assistance will continue through the 5-year timeline to incorporate riparian element into the general plans. So here are the key takeaways. Riparian areas support the natural functions of rivers and streams. Urbanization threatens the health and functions of riparian areas. Ogden River Restoration and the Big Bend Project demonstrate the benefits of riparian protection. Resilient streams are important to the urban environment, and we have exciting draft 2024 legislation to address riparian elements in general plans. And so I want to thank you all for coming today, and we've got plenty of time for questions. In fact, we have about 10 minutes for questions, so I hope you'll, ask some questions.
I'm just wondering how many organizations and agencies were involved in the restoration of the Ogden River.
Well, I know Ogden City was, Trout Unlimited, If anybody here, is Justin here by any chance? Justin Anderson worked on it with Ogden City. Division of Water Quality was involved in it. And I don't know. If you have questions about Big Bend, I'll send you over to Soren Simonson, who's the executive director of the Jordan River Commission, and he can tell you a little bit more about the groups he's worked with.
Just a quick program note, I'm Soren, and Justin was actually going to be part of a follow-up workshop right after lunch. He sent an email a couple of days ago that he has COVID and he won't be here today. So he was going to provide a whole lot of detail about that project, and unfortunately we won't hear from him. But we will hear from two others, Salt Lake City and Lehigh, that are working on riparian corridor enhancement under city ordinances that they have developed. I also wanted to add one quick, just exciting program note to the Big Bend project. Just Monday this week, the Division of Water Quality and the Jordan River Commission and other partners received notice of a $5 million grant award.
Oh, you got it.
We did. You hadn't heard.
Oh, congratulations.
About $3.5 million of that will go towards the Big Bend project, specifically to reintroduce floodplain and a meandering river corridor in a really heavy channelized area. So we're doing the Jordan River's version of the Ogden River there in West Jordan, and other parts of that funding will go to other areas for Phragmites, infestation management, and kind of revegetation with native species. So really exciting announcement.
Oh, congratulations. Yeah. And I know that we worked really hard with you guys to make that happen. So yeah, that's great.
I was curious how long that Ogden River restoration took and how much did something like that cost?
Oh, I wish I had Paul here who was actually involved in it. It started in 2010, and I believe it was completed by 2013 or 2014. And I know it's millions of dollars. It's not a cheap thing to do this kind of restoration, which is why the partnerships are really important, to be able to bring a lot of different groups together. And you know, was it the America Beautiful grant that you got? Yes, that's it's important to be able to demonstrate for grant funding sources that you've got a lot of people working together to preserve an area, and then they're more willing to put in that kind of money, and money seems to generate money too. So you get the seed money from one group, and then you go to some, well, we've got the foundation here. Okay, we'll throw in 30 or 50,000, and how about you? Well, we can't throw in money, but we can bring volunteers. So it's that whole community collaboration part of it, because it's not a cheap thing to do this kind of stream restoration. It's tens of millions of dollars, but you can do it if you sort of bring everybody together. It's sort of this, I liken it to the stone soup, where somebody, you know, put the stone in and heated up the water, and then people started bringing vegetables, and then all of a sudden you had soup, and everybody was fed. It's that kind of an idea where you need to have people coming together to make these things possible, because a city can't do it on its own.
I was curious about how an ordinance like this could play out if the floodplain is owned by a public entity versus a private landowner.
That's a good question. Jen, are you here somewhere to?
Hi, I'm Dr. Jennifer Folstad-Shaw. I'm also a resident of District 4, which is represented by Representative Galen Benyon, and helped suggest the idea of this type of legislation as a concerned citizen. So to answer the question, well, I'll give an example. So the city of Cottonwood Heights is largely already very developed, but very recently, in the past, I'd say just a month to 6 weeks, passed a riparian ordinance as part of their sensitive lands overlay zone. And they did so because, in this case, riparian areas are also included as a natural hazard area, as Christine mentioned, with flood risks. But I bring this example up because it shows that you can still develop an ordinance that governs best management practices going forward, even in a developed area. such that it creates opportunities to not take away private property rights, because there are definitely some lots that are very narrow, and so that's where these exceptions come in and allow people to still get the economic value and their own social needs out of their properties. However, where there is space, creates a buffer where we can allow the river to do its thing, as Christine mentioned. Also provides recommendations for what to plant, what you might take out of a riparian zone, and the different kinds of things like you could have in particular areas further away from or closer to the river. Things like chicken houses or dog runs, and areas where fertilization should be prohibited because it's too close and can exacerbate poor water quality and eutrophication that can lead to things like harmful algal blooms. These ordinances are hugely beneficial for areas that are currently undeveloped, but they also are very useful for helping to implement best management practices in areas that are already developed. And finally, having them in municipal code helps planners have conversations during residential and commercial redevelopment, such that we can conduct projects at various scales, like the Ogden River Restoration and the Big Bend project.
And to kind of add to that, you're also, with these kinds of ordinances, you're educating people, right? If there's a landowner who doesn't think about, if I fertilize my lawn, it's going to go into a riparian area. It creates a conversation that you might not have had otherwise. People start thinking differently. I mean, you can go past a riparian area and not really notice it that much, but once you start noticing it, you start thinking about how do you want to protect that and what kind of benefit is this area providing to me as a member of the community. People like to build houses right next to rivers. They find that an amenity for them, but understanding their responsibility and their ability to help protect those rivers, I think that's also a really important part of these kinds of ordinances and these kinds of conversations.
We've got time for one or two more, if making me work over here.
Oh, so I'll let you get this.
Yeah, could you just repeat the question?
I didn't quite hear it, so yeah.
I was just wondering, do you have any quantitative water quality data for these two projects or their effects?
I would imagine we do. I mean, the Utah Division of Water Quality does collect data. So yeah, if you're interested in that, reach out and we can get you that data. Yeah, we do monitoring, and most projects require a monitoring component to see what kind of water quality benefits there have been. So yeah, there will be water quality data.
Has there been benefits? I mean, you probably looked at this data and just, has there been benefits? Quantitative benefits?
What have been the benefits?
Yeah, have you looked at the data?
Yeah, we see that the Ogden River in that particular stretch is much less polluted than it was before, much less polluted. And actually, the Division of Water Quality created a new beneficial use for that area of swimming. So the area needs to be clean enough so that people can go in there and swim. So we're monitoring for E. coli. We're monitoring for nutrient pollution. We're looking at what's going on in that stretch of the river. And we're seeing that the improvements have been dramatic in the 10 years since the restoration project took place. But yeah, I can always look at the data and give you some specifics.
It just seems like this ordinance, this state code would be easier to sell if people could actually see a direct benefit, not a qualitative benefit.
So more quantitative rather than qualitative. That's an excellent idea. Yeah, I think that's something we should definitely consider.
Just something randomly on that. So Utah State's extension program, the Utah Water Watch, they do lots of different water quality testing, including multiple sites on Ogden, and I think they've been doing it for a long time. I don't know, 10 years, but that data is open for everybody, and I think they do it along all major waterways in Utah if you want to see that, and they test for dissolved oxygen and temperature levels and algal blooms and photo points and all that kind of fun stuff.
But I think that's a good point, that, you know, being able to make a convincing case that, yeah, the water is cleaner. I think that is really important. Thank you.
Specifically on the Ogden River project, I was involved with pieces of it, small pieces of it. I can't give you the numbers, but that section of the river is now classified as a blue ribbon fishery.
That's right, yeah.
That says it's at a pretty high standard. It's one of the only blue ribbon fisheries in an urban setting in the country. It's in a pretty rare classification. Some amazing benefits. And then you look at what's happened to the downtown Ogden area along that river. The growth that's happened, the economy that's changed, the businesses that have come in. They've been able to attract some recreational businesses. Kayaking is a big deal. They built, this is on the Weber River, but just before the confluence of those two rivers, but they've built a kayak park.
Right.
And there's a business that makes kayaks right on the banks of the river near that kayak park. They've been able to attract businesses to revitalize their community. You talk about the millions of dollars they spent. They're getting millions of dollars in revenue from an increased tax base because they've made it a place that people want to be. I can't put numbers to it, but it's tremendous, the turnaround that's happened in that area.
Thank you, thank you.
Takers? No? Okay. All right, well, thank you again. Let's give another round of applause.